Hi, this is Kara from the Special Needs Mom podcast.
And this is Angela from Especially Organized, Sensible Solutions for Special Needs Moms.
We have this heart for special needs moms. And so we thought, you know what, let's combine forces. And we have come up with what we're calling the Purge Party. And you can pretty much guess what it is. It's a party where we're going to come together and we're going to purge or, in general, accomplish a goal, a small goal together. So we have set this for January 27th, starting at 8 o'clock for my Pacific Coast people,
which means 11 o'clock for all of you on the East Coast. So this is an opportunity. If you have something on your to-do list that has just been stuck there and you are wanting to move it up on the list, you're wanting to tackle, maybe it's a space or an area of your home or a category in your home that has just needed a little time and attention. This is your opportunity for you to be online with us while you work and have access for us to help you answer your questions, help guide you, and just serve you for those 2 hours.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you can tell like what we've designed is just this very high level of support for that project that you just haven't been able to tackle on your own. The thing that we are envisioning is that you get to leave this purge party feeling so accomplished because you did the thing. You started the year off getting that thing done that you were stuck on last year. And so it's a momentum builder, if you will. You can go ahead and sign up. We have a link ready for you, and we are offering this for $40 for the whole experience.
Absolutely. And we hope you'll join us. I think it's going to be really fun. It's going to be a great group of moms of special needs kids. So we all get each other. We all have an understanding of what it's like to have something on our to-do list, but just we haven't been able to tackle it yet. So I hope that you will join us. We're super excited to bring this to you, and we are thrilled to work with you.
All right. We'll see you all there. Hi, I'm Kara, life coach, wife, and mom to 4 incredible and unique children. It wasn't all that long ago that my son received a diagnosis that had my world come crashing down. I lacked the ability to see past the circumstances, which felt impossible, and the dreams I once had for my life and family felt destroyed. Fast forward past many years of surviving and not at all thriving, and you'll see a mom who trusts that she can handle anything that comes her way and has access to the power and confidence that once felt so lacking. I created the Special Needs Mom podcast to create connection and community with moms who find themselves feeling trapped and with no one who really understands. My intention is to spark the flare of possibility in your own life and rekindle your ability to dream. This isn't a podcast about your special needs child. This is a podcast about you. If you are a mom who feels anxious, alone, or stuck, then you are in the right place. Welcome. Hello, and welcome back to the Special Needs Mom podcast. I'm really glad about the way that the scheduling of my guests and the timing of the world, all of it came together. And it was with intention that the guest that we have today is coming on just before a very special day called World Down Syndrome Day, so that you can learn about it if you don't already know about it. What we talk about is how, even if you don't have the same experience and you don't have a child with Down syndrome, how you can participate. And so I want to tell you a little bit about Crystal. She is the mother of 3, and she happens to be the mother of a child with Down syndrome. And she'll tell her story in depth, but it's interesting because she was very well acquainted with people with Down syndrome because she had worked with an organization that supports them for 7 years before she learned that she would too have a child with Down syndrome. She'll tell the story in depth, but I think there's a lot of richness to it, and I know that you'll find benefit in hearing her story. And I'm so glad, again, that the timing worked out. So listen to the episode, and she gives a really, really great call to action at the very end of the episode. And so listen for that, and I really hope that you will take to heart what she shares. Enjoy. Crystal, this has been a long time coming. Welcome to the Special Needs Mom podcast.
Thank you. I'm so excited to finally be here after over a year of talking about this.
I don't know how, I can't remember, but it has been a minute. I would say
Yes.
you're right about that. But I think, I don't know, actually, even the way that I met you through somebody else who I met through somebody else, I don't know, really beautiful connection that I remember feeling so excited about just the way that connection all comes to be. Yeah. So let's hear a little bit about your motherhood journey and share, if you're willing, about how you became a special needs mom.
Sure, sure. So my name's Crystal, and I am located in San Diego. And my husband and I always knew we wanted to have children. He's the oldest of seven. Don't want that quite that many children, but we're excited to have children. And so we actually, it has not always been a smooth ride for us. When we first got pregnant, I had an ectopic pregnancy, and so we dealt with that and a lot of emotions on that. And then in 2017, we welcomed our oldest son, Luke, in August. And we're very excited and just loved becoming a mom, loved having a son, watching him grow, watching all the newness and experiences that come with that. And our family is very close. My sister-in-laws both had sons the same year that I had Luke. So that was really special to have them all together and to watch them grow together. And we knew we wanted to have more children. So we started trying, which again was not a smooth road. It took us a while, and we actually looked into IVF, and that didn't end up being something that we were going to experience. But yeah, found out in September of 2019 that we were expecting again. And again, we're really excited and just excited to grow our family. We had done the NIPT test with Luke. We're both very A-type personality and wanted to know if we were going to have a boy or a girl. And my sister-in-laws, they found out they were having boys. They're like, oh, what are we going to have? So we did the NIPT test again with our second. And my doctor called. I was driving. I remember thinking, well, this is interesting because usually it's a nurse that calls. And she said, this is, the doctor, and we have your NIPT results. It came back positive for Down syndrome. And I said, okay. And she said, she must have said, do you know what that means? Because I said, well, yeah, actually, I've worked with people with Down syndrome for the last 7 years. And she said, okay. She said, well, are you driving? Do you want to pull over? And I said, okay, well, that's probably a good idea. So I did. And she started just going into lots of things like extra tests and, next steps. And I said, wait a second, I need to get my husband on the phone for this. So I put her on hold. I called my husband and just broke down in tears. And I said, you need to talk to the doctor with me. I think she's telling me that our baby has Down syndrome. And he said, okay. So I added him to the call, and we went through a lot of conversations and a lot of what was next and what to expect and things like that. And she went to go get off the phone. And I said, well, wait a second. Is it a boy or a girl? That's the whole reason we did this test. And she said, oh, okay. Let me look. And she said, it's a boy. And I said, okay, thank you. And we hung up the phone, and my husband said, I'm going to come home from work. I think it was like a Friday. And so he came home, and that was kind of how we found out that he had Down syndrome or was going to have Down syndrome, which after learning more information, it's like a percentage. So it wasn't for sure, but we went through with my ultrasounds and the nuchal translucency and things like that. Our percentage was like 99.9% that he was probably going to have Down syndrome. And for me, I didn't need any other testing. We didn't do amnio or the CVS or some of the other tests that people opt for, just because I knew that was probably our outcome. If it wasn't, it wasn't, but I didn't need that. definitive answer. And the risk for me, it wasn't worth it. And so we just moved forward, and that was how we found out.
Well, first off, you're a really good storyteller. And
Thank you.
and so how old is this little one now?
Thomas will be 2 in May 20th.
Okay. Yeah. So you're in the camp where you've had this child almost exclusively during COVID. And I can't even imagine having those early years be so covered with COVID. But so there was the initial impact of like the experience of learning. And I think, as you mentioned, you have a really interesting context. You were already coming to that conversation with having worked with the community that supports people with Down syndrome. How do you think that impacted your receiving of this news?
It was really interesting, I think, to hear that I was going to have a son with Down syndrome, especially after my experience from serving, like you said, the community of people with Down syndrome. Since 2013, had worked for an organization called the Poolhouse Family Foundation. And one of their main missions is to provide free programs and events for people with Down syndrome. And before I had worked with them, I had very little interaction with people with special needs. And so even I think, going into my first program with them, I was a little nervous. I didn't know what to expect. I wanted to be sensitive to their needs. I wanted to, provide a good experience. And I was like, well, how do I communicate with them? And those kinds of questions. And then I got there and I was just like hugged with all this warmth and excitement, and not just from the people that we were serving, but their family members, of wanting to help and wanting to give back. And so I really built a lot of relationships. I mean, hundreds of relationships with people with Down syndrome over the last, 7 to 10 years, and learning their likes, learning their interests, learning about their jobs, learning about their husbands and their apartments and all of these things. And so I think the biggest fear when you get that diagnosis is people say you have to mourn the child and future you thought you were going to have before you can celebrate your reality, or what their future could be. And I knew what was possible, right? I had seen that. I'd seen hundreds of stories of people who ride the BART to careers, and who ride the BART to jobs, that live independently, that, have full and plentiful lives, who are happy. So the future wasn't as scary to me. And I think there's a lot of those questions of, is he going to live with us forever? Is our son going to live with us forever? Well, I don't know, but nobody knows, right? I mean, there's lots of 30-something-year-olds who don't have Down syndrome who are still living with their parents, or there's a lot of 30-year-olds who don't have jobs. And so I think it was this understanding of nobody knows what the future is going to be, but I had that. I guess I was lucky enough to have that kind of crystal ball to see what some of the people with Down syndrome's lives are like, and how happy and how fulfilling, and how they are impactful in their community. And so I think a lot of the fear wasn't there for me. I was kind of excited to join this community that I had been serving for 7 years. And I think the hardest part of having Thomas during COVID was I couldn't take him to any of the events that we used to have and introduce him to people and to show him off and to be around those moms that I had been around for so many years. And that was hard. But I think having served the community that I served for so long, it gave me a lot of peace and excitement about what our future could be. And it gave me excitement about how Thomas was going to impact our family, how he was going to impact Luke. I knew that siblings of people with special needs and siblings of people with Down syndrome tend to, and I think there's like a Harvard study on it, tend to be more empathetic. They tend to be happier. They tend to be more fulfilled. They have, I think, a better understanding on what other people are going through. And as a parent, I mean, that's what you want, right? For your children, you want them to be loving, you want them to be understanding, you want them to be empathetic, and you want them to help other people. And so I was excited about how Thomas is going to enrich our family and enrich Luke and our future children.
Yeah. And I would love to actually, that Harvard study, I think I've heard the same things, not necessarily about that specific study, but I don't know, I should probably look that up because I think a lot of us, there's the beautiful side of having the siblings have this experience. And then there's the dark side of like, it's sometimes really hard. Even now in our situation, I was driving with my oldest son yesterday and just saying, hey, how you doing with all this? Like we're kind of preparing for another surgery and then 6 weeks of radiation. And like, it's a lot for me to handle and to process. And I can't imagine being a 14-year-old teenager. So anyhow, so I think it'd be great to kind of equip my brain with some of the actual study information to kind of say, maybe counterbalance some of the fears of what's the impact for the siblings in that experience. So I think what's so interesting is that for many moms, as they become special needs parents, one of the things that I think is one of the harder parts, not knowing what the future holds and not being able to envision a future that you like that you see you being happy or that you see your child being happy. And so it sounds like from what you shared that was one of the gifts, is that you actually had tangible examples of hundreds of people, both the individuals with Down syndrome and their families, that were thriving, that were living a life that looked desirable to you. And I'm wondering if, because there was so much good involved, that if there was any resistance that you had to still like to grieve the life that you thought you were going to have, or the parent-son relationship that you thought you were going to have. Do you think it might have contributed to any resistance on grieving maybe what was going to be?
That's really interesting. So when we got the call from the doctor, we had our conversation and I hung up the phone, and the very next call that I made was to a mom, and she happened to be the executive director of a local Down syndrome organization. And I really called her to find out about NIPT tests and what this was. And she picked up the phone and I told her, and I was crying, and I said, I'm so sorry. I don't know why I'm crying. I don't know why I'm crying. I know it's going to be okay. And she said, Crystal, just because you love our children doesn't mean that you signed up for this. It doesn't mean that you're ready to jump in and that you don't need that grieving time. And I just thought, this is coming from a mom who had been through it, whose daughter was in her 20s. And I thought, okay, don't apologize. It's okay to have these feelings. And there was not so much grief, but I think maybe a little bit of fear about what our infancy was going to look like, right? What was he going to go through medically, I think was my biggest concern, because having Down syndrome can predispose you to other medical conditions, heart conditions, thyroid issues, diabetes, leukemia, things like that. And that was, I think, a big fear for me. And going through, I think the newborn to 5 was the biggest question mark for me, not so much what our future could look like. And so that was the fear. And I think even now I try not to think too far in the future. I think for any of my children, right? I don't want to put expectations on them of my expectations on them on what I want them to be. And so I try not to think too far in the future. And I'll catch myself like, like one day maybe he's going to get married and I think, well, Thomas might. And I'm like, why would I think that? Yes, he totally could get married and he totally could have, a wedding and relationships. And so I still catch myself thinking about that as a mom of a son. Why wouldn't I have the same thoughts of the future for him that I have for my other son? And that I think is eye-opening. But I definitely went through that grieving emotion. I wouldn't say grieving. I would say I went through an emotional time during my pregnancy, just with the unknown, I think, on the medical side. But what I think was really therapeutic for me, and what I think, I really thank God for putting me on the path so many years before we got Thomas's diagnosis, was that almost immediately I started getting calls from friends or acquaintances that said, "Hey, I have this mom who just had a baby who has Down syndrome. Can you talk to her?" Or I have a friend of a friend whose NIPT test came back with a high percentage for Down syndrome. Can you talk to the mom? And so I think that the path that I had been on, I was in such, I think, a comfortable place with our diagnosis that God started using me to talk to other moms who were going through it. And I think in retrospect, it really helped me with that maybe uncertainty or some of those emotions that I was going through, to say, you're talking the talk, you have to walk the walk, right? I was using that, I think, the mentoring and the discipleship for these other moms. And that really helped me get through everything personally as well.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I think it's almost like the accountability, like you said, of like living the life that you were showing what was possible to these other moms. Like you were just so accountable to it because you were supporting these women in service and in mentorship. And I think that actually the idea of service, I think, is a way that we as special needs moms can find our way back to ourselves. I think service is one of the things that can connect us to ourselves more than anything else. I think it connects us to like the heart of who we are versus kind of maybe other parts of us. And so I think it's a great little snapshot to kind of see like you were able to step into service probably a lot quicker and sooner than maybe other people that didn't have those 7 years of experience prior, but how it served you. And I relate to this entirely, right? Because of obviously what I've chosen to do with my career. And like, yes, I get to help other people, but I feel like every time I'm helping another person, I'm also helping myself. And so I think it's obviously so valuable. And so World Down Syndrome Day is coming up. And so this episode's going to be coming out right before World Down Syndrome Day. It's March 21st. And so I wanted to hear a little bit about what that day means to you.
The World Down Syndrome Day, I think for me, it holds a lot of just more than awareness, but love, right? It's a day where the entire world, not just San Diego, not just California, not just the United States, comes together to celebrate a population of people who some segments of society and some segments of the world say are not worthy. And I think it is a great example. On social media, you see lots of videos and you see lots of images of an entire population of people that some medical professionals say aren't going to have fulfilling lives, and they're not going to do this and they're not going to do that. And World Down Syndrome Day is that platform to prove them all wrong and to say, look, we are a super happy family. We go skiing, we go snowboarding, we go bike riding. We do everything that everybody else does. And our son is just as happy, if not happier, than, 90% of people who would say that he's not those things. And so I think it's an exciting day for us as a family. I think it's an exciting day for the Down syndrome community around the world. And I would encourage you, if you don't know somebody with Down syndrome, to maybe take March 21st as an opportunity to find somebody in your community who has Down syndrome and learn a little bit about them and who they are as a person, because you'll be surprised at the differences on what you see on Google when you Google Down syndrome versus what you see in real life.
It inspires a lot of questions. And so many of us don't have this organized community that has this beautiful day. And I think because Down syndrome is such a well-defined disability in the sense of like it's clear, right? Like it's a clear diagnosis. Many parents of rare disease don't have that ability. And so I feel like there's a lot of lack of belonging because there's not clarity of like where we even would go, but then, or there's just not well-organized community supports. But I think here's what I'm thinking about. I'm like, okay, I feel like that all of us that don't necessarily have a child with Down syndrome can still benefit deeply from the conversation, from the way that World's Down Syndrome Day is created and ultimately celebrated. And I want to hear your thoughts on that. Why do you think this is important to the broader community of people with disabilities or special needs?
That is a very interesting question. And, you asked earlier, I guess, what had been on my heart. And this comes up for me is, there's a lot of talk about prenatal testing, and Down syndrome happens to be one of those things that you can, I think it's like there's 3 things that you can have a blood test at 10 weeks to test for. And so there's a lot of power behind that, right? There's a lot of power behind having that information. But what does that, I guess, tell you? And I think a lot of it comes down to expectations. And just because life doesn't look the way that you think it's going to look, or somebody doesn't look or act or behave in the way that you think their life is going to turn out, what does that mean for them? And I think it's interesting because I think about, what if there was a test, right, for your son's diagnosis, right? When you were pregnant with him, what if they could say, hey, there's a 99% chance that he's going to have this issue. What would we do with that information? Right. And so I think just because it's Down syndrome and just because it's World Down Syndrome Day, I think it sheds light on giving support and giving a platform to people who are going through something different than what we expect when we have a baby, right? What is their future going to look like? And it's because you said, like, Down syndrome is well defined and you know what to expect, but you don't know what to expect with Down syndrome, but it is well defined. And what do we do with that information? Having that unexpected diagnosis is life, and that could happen to anybody, right? It could happen to a woman in her 30s that finds out that she has breast cancer, or there's all these other things that we hope don't happen to us, but you can't predict that. And I think that Down syndrome, especially with the prenatal testing and with some of the ceilings that are put on people with Down syndrome, I think it's a great visual point to say, just because something doesn't look this way doesn't mean that it's not worthy, or that it's not worth love, or that it's not worth achievement. And I think for anybody in the world, I think World Down Syndrome Day points to that of things aren't always as you would expect them to be, but it doesn't mean they're not beautiful, and it doesn't mean that they're not worthy. I think that's a big thing that people can take away from World Down Syndrome Day.
Thank you. That was really powerful. And I definitely, the word that just kept coming over me as you were sharing was worthy, worthy.
Yeah.
And I think that much of our culture attaches worthiness to like the value and contribution and productivity to like, invent something or do the things that maybe some productive people do. And when I think we pull back and recognize like that what makes human beings worthy is being human beings. And it's not really anything else. And my faith background informs me that, it's because that's just, we are beings of love, created from love, and like we are just worthy because. And I think when we can step back from attaching expectations of value in the world as far as like what we do, I think it kind of frees up all of us. As you were saying, like, yes, people with Down syndrome and people that have children that are maybe nonverbal, maybe non-ambulatory, all the different things that I think it's easy to look at and kind of question, like, well, what's God's plan here? Like it doesn't make sense to our eyes. And actually, I'm reading a book right now. It's called Anew, and it's by one of my local mentors here. Her name's Beth Thorpe. I'm going to bring her on the podcast soon. And she runs a foundation called Mitchell Thorpe Foundation. And ultimately, her story is that her child, Mitchell, became unwell when he was 13 and ultimately suffered in pain and died at the age of 18.
Mm-hmm.
When you can look at these things that just don't make sense at first glance, right? Especially knowing that some of the medical complications that come with having the diagnosis of Down syndrome, it's hard. It's hard to be with the sadness and the heartbreak of what it's like. And you asked a really interesting question of like, if I knew when I was 10 weeks pregnant that my son would have the life that he does, the challenges that he does, like it's hard to say yes to the suffering, right? It's like the temptation to try to escape the suffering and the pain is so great.
Mm-hmm.
And yet I think that, like you said, like you pointed to, like there's so much beauty available in all of the value and the worthiness of these lives, period.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of transitioning a little bit, we share the same faith. We're both Christian. And so I wanted to hear about your faith journey if you're willing, and what it was like to have this news that maybe wasn't your first choice, and just what came up for you.
Sure. So I think it's hard for maybe people who don't have a faith background or don't have a relationship to God to fully understand it. But for me, when I look at my life before Thomas, I think, okay, yes, I believe there's God's purpose. I believe he has a plan. But then I look back and I look at how God put me on a path and put my husband and I on a path and put all these things in place and put all these relationships in our lives 7 years before we were going to need them. And then you find out you're going to have a son with Down syndrome. And I just think, okay, God, you were working in my life so long before I even realized why, right? And you look back, hindsight's 2020, and same thing I think with God's plan a lot of times is we go through the motions and we go through things that are difficult, or we go through experiences and we don't really quite know why we're going through them. And we always say it's God's plan, it's God's plan. But when you have that hindsight to look back and say, oh my gosh, God, you connected me through this person to person B so that I could interview for this job, that I would get this job, that I would work for 7 years, which nowadays I think is a long time with with one
Yes.
company, that I would work for this long, with this population of people, that I would build these relationships with families, with moms, with individuals with Down syndrome. So that 7 years later, when I found out that you were going to give me a son with Down syndrome, I was prepared. I mean, it still brings tears to my eyes to think that he loved me that much to do all of that preparation for me. And I think going back to what you said is we focus so much on what somebody's abilities are and what somebody's, can do with their life. But I think when you realize we're all fearfully and wonderfully made in God's image, it's to do his work, right? And if I never had a son with Down syndrome, would I be able to talk to as many moms and help build a community in San Diego of new moms during COVID? That's not me doing that, right? That's God's plan, because he had prepped me for so long to have Thomas that if I didn't do that, I feel like that wouldn't be honoring him and that wouldn't be honoring his plan. And so I think sometimes we look at Thomas and somebody might say, well, why did he have Down syndrome? Well, I don't know why, but maybe it was so that this community could be brought together in San Diego. When I look at the people who started the Pujols Foundation, and they started it partly because they have a daughter with Down syndrome, they've helped thousands and thousands of people who are in the Down syndrome community because of their daughter. And so to say that it's my plan or I'm doing this, it just was really impactful for me to know that this really is God's plan, and to have that history and that tangible of having it all come together in a package and say, okay, that's why I've been doing this for the last 7 years, is to prepare me for this moment and to prepare me for this next season of our lives. And as a Christian and as somebody who believes in God, I think it was the biggest relationship builder for me with my relationship with God, is to know that he had done all of that so far in the in the future, right?
Thank you so much for sharing that. I think what comes up for me is you're able to kind of look at this, like you've zoomed out and you're kind of looking at how God orchestrated all of these different parts of your life coming together to create where you're at now. Yet I'm sure that sometimes in the middle, in it, you maybe weren't as able to zoom out and see the whole picture. And I guess I want to put in something about like what came up for me is like sometimes it feels like when we're in God's plan, it's like that his plan sucks.
Yeah.
And I think that might be kind of where I'm at right now. I'm like, I don't know. Like I have a general awareness. So like, okay, like I know he has a plan, but like right now I'm like, I'm not sure I like the plan.
Yeah.
And I guess I just want to normalize that. And I want to put that in, like, if you're there, that's okay. Like you might not be able to see the whole picture right now. And I think the temptation to pull away and to say, nah, never mind, I'll do this on my own is strong. And so I think you are a beautiful example of being faithful to stay in it and to be able to like be in this gift of like seeing all the story come together in a way that is fulfilling to you. And it's obviously serving and helping other people. And so it's something to celebrate. And for those of you that are not quite there yet, it's totally okay. You may never be able to fully see the whole picture and whole plan. And sometimes you will. Sometimes you'll be able to see how it all comes together. So,
yeah.
Any thoughts as we start to wrap up? Anything that is on your mind or on your heart?
Well, I think, as we talk about connection, I think connection is a big thing for me. And I know it's hard for some people, and I've experienced this with moms that I've mentored, is sometimes you don't want to connect with other people who are going through or have gone through the things that you want, because maybe it's scary, maybe it confirms some of your fears, or maybe it gives you a glimpse that you're not quite ready to have. I know a lot of, especially new moms that I've talked to, say, they say, well, I can introduce you to lots of older people with Down syndrome who have jobs. Well, I'm not ready for that yet. I don't want to see that yet. But I think the biggest thing for me, and like you talked about, is the Down syndrome community. We're so blessed to have such a strong community and such strong organizations, that I think it's important for those people who are going through, whether it's Down syndrome or autism or something more rare, to reach out and to make those connections, because I think it sounds scary, and yeah, it might be hard, but I think that it really helps to get over those humps of emotions and to not feel like you're alone, right? To know that that's part of the human experience. Like you said, we're made from love and we're built for love. And so I think to help get through some of those fears and to help get through some of the things that we're going through sometimes, when we can feel like, oh my gosh, I'm so alone, nobody understands what I'm going through, to be able to reach out, even if it's not somebody who has the exact same experience as you, but to say, oh my gosh, we're going through this with my son or my daughter, I'm going through this, and to have that connection with somebody else who's been through something that's difficult is so impactful. And so I would just advise that anybody who maybe take March 21st, World Down Syndrome Day, as that day to reach out if you're struggling with something, if you're struggling with what things aren't looking like you thought they were going to look, to reach out to somebody and to make that human connection, which I think, especially after what we've all been through the last couple of years, is so important. And I can guarantee you, if you reach out to somebody in the Down syndrome community or to somebody with Down syndrome, you'll probably be met with like the biggest, warmest hug. So it's very therapeutic.
Oh my gosh, I'm about to jump out of my skin. I'm so in love with everything you just said. And so I am just so thankful that you put that piece in there. What's so important to note is that if you feel alone, if you feel like nobody understands, then yes, stepping out and doing something a little bit uncomfortable or that you're scared of is the antidote. So I love the idea of using March 21st to take that action, just one small action towards creating what you need. Wow. All right. Well, thank you so much. And we'll have on the show notes ways to reach out to you if that's okay. So if you guys want to have follow-up conversations with Crystal, then by all means, please reach out. She's obviously a woman of service.
Yes, definitely. Well, thank you so much. Thank you.
One more thing before we officially wrap up this show. Sometimes when I'm listening to podcasts, I have the experience of wanting more. I'm listening at the very end thinking, I sure wish that episode didn't end. I invite you, if you feel in any way the same way, I invite you to the Special Needs Mom podcast community, which is a free group that I host on Facebook, where we as a community of fellow moms who listen to this podcast and are experiencing life in similar shoes, get to talk to one another, get to share stories, get to actually interact. I hope you'll consider joining. See you over there.